Welcome back, everyone. I'm here today with Hugh Chatfield. How are you today?
I am good. Bit of a shock to the system to be back at work this week after the race and then a week of holiday, but you know, pushing through.
Amazing, amazing. So, can you first of all introduce yourself? Kind of give us a brief understanding of your running journey up to the present, up to beginning Dragon's Back.
Yeah, got it. So my name's Hugh Chatfield, and I live in North Hertfordshire, somewhere where there are no fells and hills at all, really. Live between London and Cambridge. I've like always ran a bit, so I have fond memories of doing cross country when I was like, 11 around parks in like North London and kind of where I live. And then naturally from that, I was always okay finishing like the top 5 and 10, but I just kind of enjoyed it, but not doing anything special. Then like through school and uni, did a bunch of cross country and sort of like 10K road races and half marathon road races and things like that. But never really took it that seriously. It was never really that significantly competitive until maybe the last kind of couple of years when I actually probably COVID and started taking endurance sport much more seriously. And so I started with a couple of triathlons and doing some long distance triathlons and Ironman, and I set myself a mini goal of doing a sub 10 Ironman a couple of years ago, which I then ticked off. And around that time, I got in touch with a couple of people who run in Tring, which is somewhere near, well, it's near-ish where I live, and possibly the only club in Southern England that consistently sends people up to the run and the fell races in Snowdonia and up in the lakes and the peaks. And through work, actually, I got talking to someone there who was like, "Hey, you should try this like fell running thing. It's really fun. You go up in the hills, you cover some cool ground. It's a bit more interesting than road races." And so I did that, did a couple of races like the Peak Raid series where you like or mini orienteering challenges using some like skills I'd had as a scout at school using compass, not doing seriously. And then started getting some pretty good results and started taking it more seriously. So I clocked a top 5 at Wasdale a year or so ago and started ramping up the distances and ramping up the level of the competition. Um, did a Bob Graham then in the middle of last year in a lowish 17-hour time, which I was, chuffed with because that was a top 20 time at the time. And really got the bug for this whole like spending loads of time in the mountains is great in training and when you're pushing hard. So from there, I got a coach and started working with Marcus Scotney. And from that, we set our goals on a couple of races this year. One was UTS, Ultra Trail Snowdonia in May, I think, where I was top 5. And then the Dragon's Back a couple of weeks ago. And that brings us to with a couple of other races in between, that brings us to the present, I guess.
Amazing. You make it sound so easy. You're just like, oh yeah, just a simple 17-hour Bob Graham. I love it.
Yeah, it was hard, but like as I remember it, I don't remember difficulty. I remember like fun, time with friends. The recceing was all generally great fun. I didn't have to wear my raincoat once in the entire experience in a single recce or on the day, which I think is a first for anyone trying that. Um, yeah, it's amazing the sort of like dual mind, right? And same thing with the Dragon's Back. I have to think really hard to think of the times when it was hard because generally I remember the good stuff. But I guess that's like dopamine for you, isn't it?
Yeah. So do you want to tell me a bit about the Dragon's Back and what drew you to entering the race?
Yeah, so I don't have some like big cooling story or anything like that. And it's actually the same guy, he's called Simon, the same guy in the Tring Running Club I got to know through work who encouraged me to think about fell running, who said he'd done the Bob Graham, he'd done it a couple of times. And he's actually one of the few people who've done a full Wainwrights as well. And he also did this race and loved it and talk about the journey that he'd been on. And it's not a question of one-upmanship. We're different runners and have different goals and different things we're trying to do. But I was just captivated by his story. I was like, oh, I should give that a go. But kind of in the same way that when I signed up to the Bob Graham, which was like roughly, I don't know, 6-9 months in advance of it, similar time for the Dragons Back, 9-12 months in advance. I think you do. I did so with such naivety. I'm like, yeah, I can probably do that. I've exercised for 12 hours, 11 hours before on a Ironman or whatever. I can probably do that, even though it's yes, add 5 hours. And in the case of the Dragon's Back, it was add 5 days. But yeah, and then you go and do the first recce, and you're like, whoa, this is actually a really long way. Like I remember climbing Skiddaw for the first time, thinking about the Bob, and I remember climbing Knicht for the first time, thinking about the Dragon. And it's the same feeling. It's like, whoa, this is like one climb of 40 and one climb of I don't know how many climbs there are on the Dragon, probably like 100 and something. Yeah. And so inspired by that challenge, just inspired by that friend saying, a great opportunity. I signed up to both those things, or in the first case, signed myself up, in the second case, paid the entry fee. And then you're there. And then as the sort of recce's come together, you've done 5 or 10, I found in both, actually, it begins to feel doable. You begin to sort of get a mental model of the challenge. And in the Bob, it's, 5 legs. And in the case of the Dragon's Back, it's 6 days, or, each of those breaks down into 3. And you begin to sort of say, actually, I can add those things together. And it moves from this daunting, weird, incomprehensible challenge to a set of, at least in my head, to a set of steps I think I can do. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I definitely do that even on shorter races. I call it like, oh, this is number 1, number 2, number 3. And then like it definitely helps, instead of being completely overwhelmed by, like you said, 6 days of hills and mountains the entire time. So do you want to kind of tell me about your experience of the Dragon's Back? You've mentioned that you kind of just remember it as a lot of fun, but did you kind of have any challenges? And what were some of the highlights of it?
I mean, the top highlight was finishing. It was just an amazing feeling in so many ways. I've had few more profound moments in my personal life and crossing that finish line, not just for winning, but just because the whole experience. And I'm sure everyone who finished the race, and whether they were a couple of hours slower or a couple of hours quicker or whatever it was than they wanted to be, I'm sure had that feeling. So that was like an absolutely massive highlight. I think the other sort of like highlight, I think 2 other things sort of really spring to mind as I reflect on the week. One was, although the heat was tricky, and we maybe talk about that in a bit, the bonus of heat or that type of condition is you have incredible views. And so this race, it takes a slightly, maybe deliberately awkward route through Wales, but it does so to visit the best bits. And so, yeah, the purpose of doing, for me anyway, spending time in the hills and the mountains and doing races like this is to go to cool places and move through them sort of in an efficient, flowy way. And that, I have this amazing memory of like these vistas of Wales, north, south, left, right of the sea, of sort of the sun rising in Conwy. So that, I remember that. And another thing I remember fondly was competing. So like it being a race. And I don't think everyone who does the Dragon's Back thinks of it as a race, but that's definitely where I set my sights. And when I started thinking about it, I was like, okay, yeah, I think top 20 is reasonable. And then getting a bit closer to the event, I was like, well, looking at the times, I've done a few recce runs. I was like, yeah, totally top 10, top 5, I could really be up there. And so that was like, winning was a bonus, but like that was a great feeling to be competing with some top runners and feeling like, oh, I could push a bit harder here, or blah, blah, blah. And that's just like a wonderful feeling, because I set out to compete and then found myself competing and really pushing for places and time and a few minutes here and there. And that was a good feeling. So yeah, the finish, the vistas, and the competition, I think, are some of the best memories. Camp life is amazing as well. I mean, you speak to anyone who's done the event, it's just this like wonderful micro world of like really intense friendships that last for like 5 days. And in some cases, they last for like 10 seconds a day as you pass the same person out on the hill 5 days in a row. But yeah, it's a very intense emotional experience in that sense as well.
Awesome. So you kind of led into my next question, but it was, most of the time we look at Dragon's Back and it is quite a wet experience for many, but you kind of had it over quite good, the end of summer days. How did that kind of affect the whole race as a whole?
Yeah, I think it would. It probably changed everyone's race, and I think there were some days of heat wave back in 2021 as well. I don't think the whole week was so consistently hot, but there was definitely days of it. It affects everyone's race. So if you're at the sharp end, you have to be way more careful about your level of effort. You have to be way more careful about your heart rate and things like that on the big climbs, and you just have to adjust your pacing and when you can push. Because if it is a heat wave, furnace climb, no wind, you just will not be climbing that safely, or safely in race terms, at the same speed you would at the other end. And then at the sort of convoy end, or the people doing it as more of a journey, they're for them it's really difficult as well. You have to probably triple the amount of water you're going to take out. There were people taking 4 or 5 liters out on different legs on day one and stuff. So those things were key. It really did require a different approach to the racing, a different mindset at the sharp end, and also more logistics. It also was interesting that when we were sort of map recceing a bit in camp the next day, and the sort of some of the runners would come together, it became massively important to like double check your water maps. Like, is that stream there? Is that stream too low? Is that stream too high? Things you'd be like, oh, okay, maybe there's a stream there. It doesn't really matter on a cool day. Is like, that stream, when was the last time I went past it? How big is it? Yeah, I can probably fill up there. Mm-hmm. How much water exactly am I going to take on each of these legs became just like massively important in a way I hadn't considered. I also personally think I doubt I managed the heat quite well. Like, I think that was a key to success. I didn't feel at threat from the heat at all, and when I did, it was quite infrequent. And I think the only tip there is just kept dipping my buff in my hat, all the time, like however murky and questionable the puddle.
And I'm sure, like, adding, all that water as well, it completely changes your kit, doesn't it? Because you're kind of carrying all that weight, especially. Did you find that as well?
So I didn't carry more than 2 liters ever, but I did drink a full 2 liters on different, and more actually, with streams on a couple of legs. So for me, that actually wasn't the weight impact. And I also managed to save weight from taking out my heavier waterproof and putting in my lighter waterproof and lighter gloves rather than heavier gloves and things like that. But despite that, my pack was still massively heavy on day 5 and 6, easily the heaviest pack I've ever run with, because I put so much food in. By that point, I was just eating so much, way more than I planned food wise. So, so I don't think the water changed my pack game. Pack rash became a bit of an issue, but I luckily only had that on the last day or so, and the medical team were great at giving me a bit of Safflon and tape and things, so that passed as well. Yeah, I think it's just heat is a threat that you have to, it's a challenge you have to be conscious to. Like, you have to be really specific and like, this is how I'm going to approach it. And I think I did that, and so that paid off.
Yeah, definitely. So you've just mentioned your food. What sort of things were you eating whilst you were out there?
Yeah, the golden question. So I started off with like a pretty rigorous plan of my food. I didn't plan it to the extent I would plan a single ultra. So if I was doing a single effort ultra, I would probably be like, first 2 hours I want to eat this, second 2 hours I want to eat this. But because you've got a plan for 50 hours or whatever time, 50, 60 hours, I can't make a plan, 32-hour plans of food. So instead I did the maths on aggregate. So I was like, I'm going to be out running for this much time each day at 90, 80 grams of carbs an hour. What do I need? Okay, that's my total grammage. And then I had a different calculator, which was, if I add this bit, and I'll tell you what these things were. If I add this, this, and this, get to the same number. Okay, that's what, a kilogram, or I don't know how much grams of carbs it is total, but I just made sure those numbers were right. So I planned for about 90, 80 grams of carbs an hour over the course of the week, and then threw in a bit of extra food. But by day 4, 5, 6, I was eating more than that. And I think day 4 and 5, I was genuine need, just carb deficit. I was probably eating, I think, sometimes 150 grams of carbs an hour if I add in drinks and stuff, which is way higher than I've ever done in training. But I just felt I needed it. Something would go in, and 15 minutes later I'd be like, I'm still hungry. On day 6, I'm not sure I needed it so much, but I was then in that habit, and there might have been a sort of norm then had developed. I was like, oh, okay, I need to take in food. I feel a bit rubbish. I'll take in food. I feel a bit rubbish. And I don't know if I was sort of eating through habit rather than need, but definitely day 4 and 5. What did I eat? Gels. I looked hard for the 40-gram carb gels, the slightly more expensive, slightly more intense ones. Chews as well, similar thing. And then I was trying to get through a bar or 2 a day, something with a bit more weight to it, and a pack of crisps or 2 a day, actually 2 packets of crisps a day as well. A few salt tabs, nothing over the top, like 4 or 5 a day kind of thing, so 1 every couple of hours. So I think the important principles for me were just massive amounts of carbs. You just have to get them in, and I varied it. However, I ran out of food on day 4. I ate myself out of food twice, and so right at the end of day 4, one of the other competitors, Owen, subbed me a gel, which was crucial for the last 5K, absolutely crucial. And then, day 6, I'd also run out of food I wanted. And so luckily there's a bit of a donations box in camp for some people who've dropped out or brought more food and reduced their course. And so I scrounged, like, I don't know however many gels, 10, I had them all from that box. I think in future I'd go more gels though. I think I tried too much to vary it, and I should have just stuck a bit more fluid, because they just go in a bit easier, quicker. I think I had to do the maths. Well, I had to do the maths for this race specifically because there's also a weight limit. So in your kit. So I literally got to the point of I can take these 2 extra gels or a spare t-shirt. Like I was literally at that point when I was weighing my kit. I'm on 14.9 kilos or whatever. You know, I was literally making that decision. And I went to weigh in my kit. I had a bag of extra food. Like, can I put this in? So you have to do that maths, I think. I don't think there's really a choice. You maybe don't need to do it so detailed or whatever, but I think if you want to compete this race, you at least have some rules of thumb about I eat this much every hour. How many hours am I going to run for? This is how much I need to pack. Otherwise, you know, more would go wrong. But then also there's keep eating. I mean, I was one of the support guys at one point said that great, the team running, the like hill team running the support points. One of them says, you consistently come in with more rubbish. And although that's bad environmentally, that's great from an ultra running perspective, I think. And one of the media team, Zoe, who was chatting with me at one point, was like, yeah, it's like a walking picnic, isn't it? I was like, yes. So you do just have to eat, which can be hard. And I definitely didn't enjoy that in my earlier longer distance races, but now it's like part of it, right? It's just part of the challenge.
Yeah, definitely. So the setup of the race is like it's full of really tight cut-offs, and some people kind of really struggle with that. Obviously, you were towards the front of the pack, so you know when you were initially doing the training and the recce's, was that kind of in the back of your mind?
I was never really worried about I wasn't really ever that worried about the cut-offs.
Yeah.
There's a weird reason the cut-offs do matter to people at the sharp end, which is that some versions of the race they would start you later, and then getting to the midpoint if you have a blow up, for example, could be challenging. This year, because of the heat, there were 2 particular risk protocols. One was you had some neutralized time to cool down on the hottest days in the checks, and the second was they didn't enforce really late start times for the sharp end runners. So that cut-off issue moved away. And also, I mean, I was lucky that the times I was clocking in recce's meant that was not where I was planning to be in the pack. But one of my massive takeaways from this race was how impressed and how inspired I was by people chasing the cutoffs. So I think this race is challenging on so many different levels. It's challenging if you want to race it and clock a fast time. It's also challenging if you're a slightly slower runner and you want to make those cutoffs. I think that some of the people I was most inspired by on this race were those who were cutoff surfing and were getting into camp at 10 and getting up and leaving at 6. And so they have, you know, literally half the amount of time I might have in camp to do all those things you need to like be a human, like wash and eat and rest. And they have half the amount of time to do that. And I was like, I didn't know if I could do that. And they might look at what I was doing and be like, I can't do that. And I was like, well, it's just a different challenge at both ends. Great race, great event for that, because everyone's on their own personal journey against shame, really, and Wales.
So when did you kind of know that you were, you know, first place or even kind of within the top 3?
Well, so I mean, I led the race from the start actually on paper. I think I was joint. John and I topped so there's the first checkpoint is like 20 minutes out, and then the first main checkpoint, Tally-Fan, is like an hour and a bit out. And I think John Shields and I tapped that basically at the same time. And then I was kind of leading the race from there, really. I don't think I ever thought it was however, I think your question maybe in this context then is, did you ever think you were like leading and like in the bag in a kind of way?
Yeah.
Which I didn't. So I think the gap was something like 40 minutes day 1, and then I added 15 or so minutes the next few days. And then quite a lot on day 5 and then a bit more on day 6. And I think the winning margin was like a couple of hours or something like that, in that ballpark. And I never thought it was in the bag. So Jacob, who was running second, is an incredibly strong runner, and he was on sighting all of this. He'd never been to Wales before, which made it doubly as impressive. Whereas I spent weeks in the hills there. No, and I never thought so. In the Dragon's Back, there's always a long way to go. An hour on a 70k course with 3k of elevation is not a big gap. And so if you have a blow up in the heat, I never thought it was in the bag until I was in walking distance of the castle with the gap. So when I was like 2 hours walk from Cardiff Castle, then I was like, okay, worst blow up, I'm still getting over the line here. But I didn't think it was in the bag until you know, literally 2 hours walk from Cardiff, you know, like just the edge of the city. Because it's such a challenging race and the conditions were so hot and it's an ultra race. So yeah, I sort of raced each day. Marcus, my coach, at some point, I texted him a bit in the middle of the week when it was feeling harder, I was more nervous, and he was like, you could take day 4 as a rest day, which I think reading back is hilarious because, you know, it's still an ultra marathon. His point is valid. It's a shorter, easier day. I had a reasonable gap. There was no need to push. But that's sort of easier said than done when you then get up in the next morning, you've got some quality ultra runners who've left 5 minutes before you. You know, you can't rest really. So yeah.
So Montana are such an amazing kind of brand when it comes to race organization. How did you find their organization on the whole?
Yeah, Montaigne and Aria, right,
Yeah.
combined to do this. And Shane leads that team of volunteers and the crew and the paid crew. Incredible. So incredible for a couple of reasons. Like, one, it's a legitimately difficult thing to do to organize that race, and two, I think they did it really well. So in terms of its difficulty, like, yeah, I mean, a bunch of runners in what were challenging conditions, the helicopter was called a few times, traverse broadly inhospitable terrain with low phone signal and stay in random fields, and need excessive amounts of food, water, encouragement. They need their stuff to be dried, and they need electricity, and Wi-Fi now. And so a team of volunteers that I don't think missed a beat. Like, I at no point came across a volunteer or a paid crew member who wasn't smiling, encouraging, inquisitive, helpful, energetic at any point in those 6 days, which is, you know, incredible. And so both the challenge was really difficult, and I think it did it wonderfully. It makes it fun. It makes it possible. Yeah, incredibly grateful to everything that team did to run an amazing event. And I also think they did a couple of things that were really important. So I think it was really important they introduced the heat risk protocols and the adjusting the start times and also allowing a break. You know, I think most people would have still been fine. They'd have been clever with their water and they'd have taken longer breaks, but there was a risk of more people being very unwell, and I think that was, you know, very, very wise that they did that, because sometimes your competitive spirit eats safety. And so yeah, I'm incredibly impressed with how the event was run. Yeah.
Amazing. So tell me about crossing the finish line then. Was it a really emotional kind of moment?
Yeah, it was a really emotional moment. I had I think three really emotional moments in the race. So I was actually pretty emotional at the first support point in the Ogwen Valley. I welled up there because I saw my mum sitting on the side and I was running in. I was like, this is pretty cool. Whatever happens from here, I'm leading this like historic race into the heart of Iriri. And like, yeah, this is a cool moment. So I felt quite emotional then. I felt really emotional at the end of day 4, which was my hardest day physically, the aforementioned rest day. And I felt quite emotional. I saw my parents there again. They followed the race through Wales, and that was a great boost. And then I felt pretty emotional on the finish line. How did it feel? I think the picture sort of sums it up. I think there's the picture that they produced with the day's write up was me doing something like this. It's like looking a bit shocked, pulling my hair back and eyes wide and opened. And that was the feeling. I didn't really quite believe it for a bit. And then it was also great to see my parents and Millie, my girlfriend, who were there at the finish line. I'd seen Millie briefly earlier that day, but not all week. And so, yeah, the first thing I did after I'd like worked out what was going on was go and speak to them. Humbling, amazing. It was a wonderful feeling to sort of put loads into something over a period of 6 months, I guess, and then get loads out of it. Yeah. Won't forget it in a long time.
Definitely. So what did you name your dragon then? Because they're kind of iconic, these little dragon things.
Yeah, I haven't actually named him. He's sitting currently on or she, not sure, sitting currently on our living room table. Millie has said must move soon, but I think
Can I see it? Can we see it?
Yeah, of course. So this is they make it look quite cute, really, I think.
They do.
Relative to the actual hills of Wales. There we go. To move on to the work desk for a little bit this afternoon, perhaps. I haven't named it. Not sure I will name it. Very wonderful trophy.
Amazing trophy. So what do you have next on the agenda? Will you be returning back to Dragons back to reclaim another title, or is that done now?
Yeah, good question. In the week of the race, a couple of times I said, "Oh, I don't think I'd race this again." I'd love to go back and do it with a friend and maybe in a different way and approach the race and maybe less as a race and more as a journey. But everyone knows who's done any big race like that, what you say in the race has no bearing on whether you will actually do it again. I'm not sure. Almost certainly won't do it next year. I don't think that's the a race focus for next year. although Simon Roberts was hanging around at the finish line saying things about his plans to run it again and how hard he wanted to race it and things, which was tempting. But no, I definitely won't do it again next year. I don't want to take too many risks. Like, it was a big risk I'm quite a lean guy, quite early in my ultra running like career, if you call it that. And so there's a massive injury risk of doing a race like that. And so I fell down on, yes, I'll do it this year, but I want to be careful about when I do it next. What's next in terms of big races? Actually, currently building a plan. I think it really depends on how recovery goes. I haven't run since the event. I was going to go for a run this evening, maybe, as my first non-walk since there was about 10 days or so ago. So yeah, I don't know. I think my next big goal, I'd love to give the CCC a big shot in Europe and do some racing in Central Europe in the Alps and things. So I think that's probably the next big A race, but that's 12 months away. So I'll definitely fill it with some more stuff. Thinking about the Tour de Helvellyn again, which was a great race last year. Try and get out for the Om as well at the end of October. Yeah, definitely do a load of running, but I won't be going back to like a 6-day 380k venture for a year or two.
Amazing. Thank you very much for joining me today. Good luck with the future. We'll definitely be looking out for you.
Not at all. Thanks very much for having me.